My name is Soraya Richard. I am 32 years old. My dad has always forgotten my birthday. Not just sometimes but every single year. No matter how many hints I gave or how clearly I said the date, it didn't seem to stick in his mind. Meanwhile, my sister's birthday was like the event of the year every time. Dad would throw big parties for her with balloons, decorations, a cake so huge it could feed half the neighborhood, and a crowd of people all there just to celebrate her. There would be speeches about how amazing she was and how proud he was of her, and the music would play all day. Every year it was bigger and fancier than the last. My birthday though? My birthday was always small and quiet, like it barely mattered. Sometimes it was a rushed dinner at a restaurant while Dad was on his phone with work calls. Sometimes it was a quick cake at home with a couple of family members who were too busy to stay long. I tried to pretend it was fine even when I felt left out. I told myself that it didn't matter, that birthdays were just a date on the calendar, and that Dad was busy providing for the family. But inside I felt small, like I didn't matter the same way my sister did. This year, like every other, my dad forgot. I had tried to let it go, to be understanding. But this year I decided I would not pretend it was okay anymore. I decided I would do something for myself, something I could control, something that proved I could make my life my own. I had saved money over the years. I had been careful, working late nights, taking extra jobs, and watching my savings grow little by little in an account Dad never asked about. This money wasn't just for fun. It was proof that I could take care of myself. With that money, I signed the papers and bought a small house by a quiet lake, far away from anyone trying to control my life. It was peaceful, safe, and entirely mine. When I finally had the keys in my hand, I did one simple thing. I went out on the deck, held my phone up, and took a picture. I didn't make it fancy. I didn't even smile for the camera. It was just a picture to show that this was real, that this house existed, that I had done something big for myself. Then I posted it online with just 4 words. Birthday gift. Self-gift. I didn't send it to Dad. I didn't tag my sister. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I just put it out there and went back inside to start unpacking my boxes. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing like it had a life of its own. Missed calls, text messages, notifications from the family group chat exploding all at once. My dad, who had never had the time or memory to call me on my birthday, suddenly had a lot to say about my life. Before I tell you what he tried to do next and what I had to do to protect the house and myself, I want to know something. Where are you reading this from, and what time is it for you right now? I want to see how far this story about family, loyalty, and payback can travel. The calls didn't stop. My phone kept skittering across the table with every new vibration. I let it ring until the screen dimmed, then it lit up again with another wave of angry messages. For once, I had done something big without warning anyone, and the reaction was instant. I opened the family group chat first. Messages had stacked up in the few minutes it took me to walk from the deck to the kitchen. Screenshots of my post were there, circled and commented on as if someone had gathered evidence for a trial. Nobody asked if I was safe. Nobody asked if I was okay. They asked why I had done it, how I had afforded it, and what other people would think. My dad's name appeared again and again in the messages. He wrote about how irresponsible it looked, how ungrateful it made him seem after everything he had done for us. He mentioned the invitations already printed for my sister's next party, the guests he had to face, and the image of a perfect family he had been showing to everyone for years. My house by the lake, in his words, was a crack in that picture. My sister added her own messages. She asked if I was having problems, suggested I might be acting out, and reminded me that big financial decisions should be discussed with the family. There was nothing kind in the way they spoke. It didn't feel like worry. It felt more like annoyance that I had stepped off the script, that I had done something for myself and not made it about them. I scrolled through the messages slowly, and something inside me started to feel different. For years, I had read messages like this and felt like I had to fix everything. I had rushed to explain, to soften things, to clean up any situation that made life uncomfortable for my family. But now, standing in my kitchen in my own house, I read the words differently. Their panic wasn't about me. It was about control. When my dad finally called me directly, I let it ring twice before I answered. He did not say, "Happy birthday." He did not ask how I was or congratulate me on the house. He went straight to demanding an explanation. Why had I made a purchase like that without asking him? Why had I posted it online? Why had I chosen this exact moment, right before my sister's big celebration? I didn't tell him about the savings, the late nights, the careful planning. I didn't explain how I had been working for years to make this dream come true. I simply told him that the house was mine, the money was mine, and the decision had already been made. There was silence on the other end. That silence said more than anything he could have shouted. He wasn't used to someone making a big decision without asking for his approval first. He tried another approach. He reminded me of family expectations, of how much effort he had put into my sister's milestones, and how important it was that we all show a perfect family to the world. He said people would talk, that I was making life harder than it needed to be. For a moment I almost fell back into the old habit. The part of me that would have apologized, promised to visit soon, and downplayed the house rose up like a reflex. But I didn't follow that old script. I just listened until he ran out of things to say. Then I told him I understood how he felt, but that I would not change anything. My voice stayed even, not because I was calm but because I finally knew exactly where I stood. I hung up before he could start arguing again. My hands weren't shaking. Their outrage had arrived as expected. What they did not expect was that this time I was not going to fix it. When the noise from my phone finally calmed, the memories stepped forward. Standing in that kitchen, I felt years of being treated unfairly line up behind me like closed doors. Every one of those memories showed the same pattern. My dad celebrated my sister like she was the star of the family and treated me like I was barely there. My lake house didn't come out of nowhere. It was the first time I had turned that pattern around. I thought about birthdays past. The first time he forgot mine, we were still in school. My sister had a huge party, rented a space, music and decorations everywhere, and a cake big enough to feed half the neighborhood. My birthday? A rushed dinner squeezed between Dad's work calls. The check hit the table before I finished my drink and everyone pretended it was enough. He said he was busy providing for us. I told myself it was fine. It didn't stop there. When my sister graduated, he planned a full weekend of events, announcements, photos, and speeches about pride and legacy. When I graduated, he shook my hand in a hallway and left early to pick up a suit from the tailor. He mentioned traffic, meetings, and work. He didn't mention my name when talking about our family's successes in front of other people. What hurt the most wasn't the lack of gifts or parties. It was the way he measured worth. My sister's choices were treated as investments. Mine were treated as hobbies until they proved useful. When she needed help with tuition, it was a family priority. When I worked extra shifts to save for my own goals, it was nice but not important enough to change plans. As we got older, it became more public. He would post about her successes, write long messages about how proud he was, and tell the whole world how she carried the family name forward. When something good happens to me, it might get one short line, if that. In private, he would use my work as an example of stability when it suited his story. But the spotlight never stayed on me. It always swung back to her. I had accepted it for years because confronting it felt like breaking something I wasn't sure I could live without. Every time I thought about standing up for myself, I heard the same phrases in my head. That I was overreacting. That all families are a little uneven. That I should be grateful things weren't worse. So I swallowed it and told myself I was being mature. The money that helped buy the lake house didn't come from nowhere. It came from late nights, hard deadlines, and work no one else could take away from me. I had done the work, tracked every payment, watched the numbers grow in an account no one else touched. My father never asked about my finances. He assumed I would always be there if he needed something. Now, for the first time, that assumption cost him something he cared about. Not money. Not bills. His story. The story where he controlled everyone's life, where my sister shone, and I stood just far enough behind her to make the family look balanced. A house bought without him in a place he hadn't chosen was more than a purchase. It was a refusal. It was proof that I could do something important on my own. Proof that I was willing to put my name on it. Proof that his version of the family wasn't the only one people could see anymore. That was the first real consequence he had ever faced. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't begging. I wasn't asking him for anything at all. I was simply living in a way that no longer protected his image at the cost of my own happiness. As I unpacked dishes and folded towels into drawers in my new home, I finally understood why his reaction had been so sharp. The lake house didn't just represent distance. It represented proof. Proof that I could build something significant without anyone's guidance and that I was willing to take credit for it. Proof that I didn't need his approval to do something big. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of years lift off my shoulders. I had lived my whole life following patterns that weren't fair, that made me feel small, that told me my worth was less than someone else's. Now, standing in my own kitchen, I could see those patterns clearly. And I could see myself stepping out of them, finally free. I knew that my dad would keep trying. He would keep calling, messaging, and trying to control the story. My sister might continue to act concerned or annoyed. But none of that mattered anymore. I had done something that was completely mine. Something that could not be taken from me. And that, more than any birthday party or gift, was the best birthday present I could ever give myself. I didn't feel proud in a loud, showy way. I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt steady. I felt real. I felt like the person I had been trying to be my whole life. Someone who could make choices for herself. Someone who could live her own story. Someone who didn't have to shrink to make others comfortable. That was the moment I understood that birthdays, parties, and even words from others could not define me. My life, my decisions, my happiness. Those were mine. And for the first time I let them be just that. Mine. For the first time in my life, my dad noticed that I wasn't following the story he wanted me to be part of, and everyone around us could see it too. It felt strange, like my absence from his plan had a name and an address. It was as if the world could notice that I wasn't playing the role he had written for me. The next wave of his attention came differently. This time it didn't hit me directly. It came through other people. People who usually stayed away from our family problems. A coworker sent a short message asking if everything was okay at home. It was simple and polite, but it told me that word of my dad's behavior was already reaching beyond our family. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in months liked a photo of my house online and then sent me a private note. The note felt strange. It was half caring, half curious. That's when I realized that my dad had started talking about me to others. He never liked to look unreasonable. He didn't want anyone to think he was wrong. So he never started with anger when others were involved. Instead, he used a calm, careful tone. He sounded like he was worried, disappointed, or hurt. But this time the words didn't sound like him. They sounded like something he had carefully written for other people to see. For years he had used this tone to control me. Calm, rational, disappointed. That was his favorite method. But now he was using it on other people to tell a story where he was the patient, kind father, and I was the unstable, reckless daughter who needed guidance. The more I heard, the easier it became to see the pattern. My house wasn't just a small crack in his image. It was a threat to the role he had written for himself. Then money came into the story. I saw it in a message forwarded by a relative who could tell when someone was crossing a line. My dad suggested that since I had enough savings to buy a house by the lake, I should cover a large part of my sister's upcoming celebration. The number he asked for wasn't small. It would have used almost all of the money I had saved, the very money I had worked so hard to keep for myself. It was the safety net that allowed me to make my own choices. He didn't ask me directly. He told other people what he expected me to do and waited for them to deliver the pressure to me. It was a familiar tactic, but this time I was outside watching it happen instead of being in the middle of it. That distance changed everything. Instead of explaining why his request was unfair, I asked myself a different question. What if I just refused and let the consequences happen? The answer was uncomfortable but honest. He would have to either admit publicly that he had been counting on my money or change his plans to match reality. Either way, for the first time, something would cost him more than it cost me. I started gathering something I had never allowed myself to collect before. Proof. Not to post online, not to humiliate anyone, but to remind myself that this wasn't all in my head. I collected screenshots of messages where my birthday was treated like an inconvenience. I saved photos of events where I had been there, but the captions erased me. I kept notes I had written on bad nights, documenting what was said so I wouldn't rewrite it later in a softer, kinder way. Looking at all of it together felt like reading a case file. For the first time, I wasn't the one on trial. He had spent years building a story where I owed him constant understanding. Any resistance from me made him the victim. Standing in my living room, surrounded by packed boxes and proof, I made a quiet decision. I was done defending myself inside a story he controlled. If he wanted to keep talking about me, he would have to do it without my cooperation. That was the beginning of the real revenge. Not yelling, not dramatic scenes, but a quiet, deliberate refusal to carry his version of the story any further than my own front door. The opportunity to act came sooner than I expected. It started with an email from a relative who usually stayed neutral. She had been invited to my sister's celebration and wanted to know if I was coming because she had heard different stories. Her message was short, careful, and polite, making it the perfect place to move from collecting proof to actually using it. I didn't write a long explanation. I wrote only the facts. I told her that my dad hadn't called me on my birthday. I told her that he had talked about my money with other people before asking me directly. I told her that the house by the lake had been bought with my own money. I didn't use insults, emotional words, or tell her what she should believe. I just gave her the pieces and let her put them together herself. That response became my pattern. Whenever coworkers, cousins, or family friends reached out with caution, I did the same thing. I stopped covering for him. I stopped filling in the gaps between what he said and what actually happened. Whenever someone mentioned that he was worried about me, I answered with one clear sentence about what I had done and what he hadn't. You can only control a story as long as other people depend on you to translate it. The moment I stepped out of that role, cracks began to appear. They weren't dramatic confrontations. They were quiet, small changes. A colleague chose not to attend my sister's party after hearing both sides. A relative mentioned that the way my dad spoke about my finances didn't match how I actually handled money. He couldn't accuse them all of disloyalty without showing a pattern. Money pressure came around again, but this time it hit something solid. The place for my sister's celebration required a final payment larger than my dad had planned, because he had counted on my contribution. When he tried to quietly adjust things, people noticed. Deposits had been promised. Vendors had been told to expect full payment. Cutting back suddenly meant explaining why. The answer no longer sounded like a man in control. He had options. Borrow the money, pretend it had always been smaller, or pay it himself. None of these fit the image he had built. For the first time, he had to choose between pride and comfort. I wasn't there to watch it unfold, but small pieces still reached me. A last-minute change to the guest list. A cheaper menu than planned. Someone mentioning that he looked strained the whole night instead of triumphant. Small details, but together they formed a picture I had never seen before. A night that revolved around my sister, but did not feel like a clear victory for him. Meanwhile, my life didn't collapse the way he had implied it would if I stepped out of line. The house became a home. I learned which stores in town had what I needed and which faces I could expect to see each week. My work remained steady. The numbers in my accounts moved the way I had planned, untouched by anyone else's emergencies. That contrast was its own form of justice. The more stable I became, the shakier his story looked. A controlling parent can only call you reckless for so long before people start comparing words with real-life results. Here I was, living quietly, paying my bills and hurting no one. There he was, stretching finances for appearances and using other people's names to prop up his own image. I didn't expose him with a big dramatic reveal. I did something far more dangerous to his version of reality. I let the truth sit in plain sight and refused to move it out of anyone's way. The line he crossed next was different. It didn't come through relatives or whispers or group chats. It came in my work inbox, folded inside an email from my manager. The subject line looked normal, the kind that usually hides routine information. But the content was not normal. Attached was a message my father had sent to the company's general contact email, asking to speak with someone in authority about my recent decisions. He wrote that he was deeply concerned about my judgment and hinted that I might be unstable, suggesting that a sudden property purchase by a daughter who refused family guidance could mean I was unreliable. He didn't name the lake house, but he didn't have to. He framed it as a warning, as if undermining my career would somehow pull me back under his control. My manager didn't respond to him. She forwarded it to me with a short note asking if everything on my end was okay and whether I wanted to formally document the contact. She didn't sound scared or nervous. She sounded offended on my behalf. Reading his words at my desk, I felt something settle instead of break. He was willing to risk my income, my career, and my reputation just to regain control. Any doubt about why I had created distance disappeared at that moment. This wasn't about care. This wasn't about concern. This was about ownership. He wanted to own my decisions, my money, my life. And now, for the first time, I didn't let him. We had a meeting with the people at work who help when something unfair happens. I brought emails, pictures of messages he had sent in other ways, and a short list that showed what had happened over the last few weeks. I didn't make the story bigger or worse than it was. I just told them the truth. I said that a family member, my father, was interfering in my life in ways I did not like and that made things harder for me. They listened carefully, wrote down notes, and promised me that if he tried to contact me again, it would be watched and recorded. That meeting created a paper trail like a record that he could not change. This was important because it meant he could not hide what he had done. After that meeting, things started to happen quietly. A very important person at work saw his email and remembered him from other events they had attended together. They said it was not a good idea to try to boss around your own adult child in writing. Another person who had heard a little of his version of the story asked me if I needed help dealing with controlling family members. The nice image my father had built of himself started to crack like a broken vase, in front of people whose respect he cared about the most. I did not make a big deal about it. I did not show the messages to anyone who did not need to see them. I did not tell him that his email had backfired. I let him believe what he had done did not matter. That was part of justice in a quiet way. He had tried to throw a stone at something he thought I needed more than he did. But the thing he tried to break stayed strong like a building that was well built. People noticed his hand, not mine. At home, my decisions became simpler. I removed him from the lists for emergency contacts. I updated records that still had the family house listed as a backup address. I closed every door he might try to use to get into my life without asking me. None of this was loud or dramatic. It was quiet and deliberate. Everything I did was final and complete. I took the last step carefully and thoughtfully. I wrote one message to the family email list, the same one that had carried announcements about my sister's parties for many years. I said that I had been treated unfairly for a long time and that recent actions had crossed a line and caused me harm. I told them that I was choosing to stop talking to my father and anyone who tried to speak for him. I did not ask anyone to understand me. I did not invite arguments. I ended with one simple sentence. I wished them well from far away and said I would not be part of this family dynamic anymore. Then I pressed send, blocked the phone numbers I needed to block and went outside. The lake was calm that evening. For the first time, the quiet around me did not feel like something forced on me. It felt like something I had chosen and claimed for myself. A few months after sending that email, my life no longer looked anything like what my father had planned. The distance between us stayed. No one tried to sneak me into secret conversations. No one tried to negotiate on his behalf. The family members who answered my messages kept them short and simple. Some admitted that they had noticed this pattern for years. Some quietly stepped back, giving me the space I needed. The silence that followed was not a test to see how long I would bend. It was a recognition that I would not bend no matter what. I got small updates about my father from others. A business contact mentioned to one of my colleagues that he had heard about the email my father sent to my company, and it was not a good look for him. An old neighbor told a cousin that his jokes about difficult children were not funny anymore. No one confronted him directly. They just stopped believing everything he said about his daughters. He could not fix that with a speech, money, or favors. Inside the family, things started to shift too. My sister, who had always stood in the brightest part of my father's attention, began to notice how small and narrow that space really was. When people heard about new plans for her, they did not automatically agree or nod. They asked where I was living now, how I was doing, and if things were really as simple as he made them sound. For the first time, his story had visible gaps and I was not there to fill them. I did not rush to explain anything. When someone came to me directly, I told them the same story every time. I explained what I had done, what my father had done, and where my boundary now stood. No insults, no exaggeration, just the truth. Without realizing it, I had stopped being his shield and had become a mirror he could not control. Meanwhile, my own life became almost boring from the outside, which felt like a luxury. I worked, paid my bills, fixed small things around the house, and learned who to call when something broke that I could not handle alone. I made friends who knew me for who I truly was. They did not care who my father was. They cared about whether I did what I said I would do. That steady, simple life was the opposite of the chaos he had predicted when he tried to interfere with my job. Every steady month in that house was a quiet answer to his claims that I was unreliable. He had tried to weaken my foundation, but all he really did was show his own weaknesses. Nothing dramatic happened after that. There were no surprise visits. No last attempts to win me over. Control does not usually chase what it cannot command anymore. It quietly retreats and rewrites the story for the audience that remains. I am sure that somewhere in his version of this story, I am still the ungrateful daughter who chose distance over loyalty. That is his right. He can keep that version of the story as long as he wants. I do not have to live inside it. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is not that cutting ties is easy, and it is not that everyone should do what I did. The lesson is that there comes a point where protecting someone else's comfort costs you more than you can afford. My father's punishment did not come from anything dramatic I did. It came from losing the ability to use me as a prop in a life he cared more about polishing than sharing. You cannot always make people see what they have done. But you can stop helping them hide it. If you hear pieces of your own life in mine, remember this. You are allowed to step out of roles that shrink you, even if that means becoming the villain in someone else's retelling. Sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is simply living well in a story you write for yourself. You do not have to explain, justify, or fight. You can just live. You can make choices that feel right for you. You can take care of yourself and build your life quietly, steadily, and fully. That quiet strength can be more powerful than anger, shouting, or confrontation.